What do wizards and attorneys have in common? Anyone? They're always speaking Latin. I'm pretty sure Hermione cast habeas corpus on Neville at the end of Sorcerer's Stone. And I'm also certain that I learned about the 4 elements of expecto patronum in civil procedure. But why did Latin, or what sounds like Latin, become the preferred choice for incantations? And do other cultures use Latin spells as well? In part 1 of this History of Magic, we will explore how different cultures developed their magic across the globe. And in part 2, we will investigate how that ties into ancient magic and our characters' involvement in the plot of Hogwarts Legacy. Accio Attorney, a trustworthy muggle in the wizarding world. What's fascinating about the wizarding world is that magic is geographical. Hungarian horntails are native to Hungary, gillyweed is native to the Mediterranean Sea, and the phoenix, interestingly enough, is native to Egypt, India, and China. Do you know what else you'll find in China? Everyone's favorite, the Chinese chomping cabbage. Since magic is geographical, it makes sense that it's also cultural, that different cultures practice magic in different ways. Across the entire world, and within these cultures, one thing is present when it comes to performing magic: a unique, cultural-specific tool that helps witches and wizards amplify their magical abilities. Let me explain by first taking a look at some ancient Asian and African cultures. Ancient history tells us that Chinese masks have origins in shamanic rituals of old. These masks were used for exorcisms and worn by sorcerers and supernatural beings. For Muggles, masks mean many things, but are mostly meant to disguise, amuse, or terrify. Is it possible that ancient Chinese masks gave ancient wizards more power? I think so. A mask is a transformative thing, just like the power of magic is transformative. Masks conceal your identity, and ambiguity gives you power. It offers protection, cohesion, while also distinguishing you from others. Hogwarts Legacy seems to agree about the importance of masks, as you can get an exclusive mask by linking your Harry Potter fan club account to Warner Bros. Games. Will this mask increase your magical abilities by means of a status boost, or is it merely aesthetic? That's to be determined, but I wouldn't be surprised if it gave us some sort of advantage. For Egyptian wizards, ancient history tells us they believed certain objects were charged with magic. Scepters and amulets are common examples. These tools helped bleed magic into the user, much like a wand does. The ancient Egyptians were also known for their written language, one of the oldest writing systems in the world, the hieroglyphics. The word hieroglyphic literally means sacred carvings. Healing and protection spells specifically were evoked through hieroglyphics. And where else do we see sacred illustrations in the wizarding world? Ancient Runes class. We see a few of these runes in the trailer, and I'm sure they will have something to do with the plot. You may then be asking, well, what's the cultural specific tool for Europe, for Hogwarts? I'm glad you asked. The magical vehicle behind Harry Potter and thousands of European wizards is Latin. Now, I'll get to that in a minute, but first let's talk about the mechanics of magic in general for British witches and wizards. The Deathly Hallows teaches us of the power of the famed Elder Wand, but wands are primarily a European tool. We learned a lot about wand mechanics from that final book, but we don't know much about incantations. In Chapter 10 of The Sorcerer's Stone, Professor Flitwick says, "Saying the magic words properly is very important too. Never forget Wizard Barufio, who said S instead of F and found himself on the floor with a buffalo chest." So, though it isn't really expanded upon, spoken language appears to be an important vehicle for channeling magic. Yes, children are able to use magic, intentionally or not, before they receive a wand or know any incantations, but that magic is not nearly as powerful. In Chapter 14 of The Goblet of Fire, Professor Moody says, "Avada Kedavra is a curse that needs a powerful bit of magic behind it." You could all get your wands out now and point them at me and say the words, and I doubt I'd get so much as a nosebleed. There are numerous other examples about how a young Harry would be no match for Sirius or Voldemort or whomever, which tells me there are levels of magic. And the fact that children know magic without learning it means that magic is innate to this world. But I'll get to that in part 2. And yes, you might also bring up nonverbal spells, which we learn about in Half-Blood Prince. Professor Snape teaches nonverbal spells in Defense Against the Dark Arts, but these are very difficult to execute and not as strong as spells with incantations. If we go to the previous book, Order of the Phoenix, in Chapter 38, we learn that the curse that hit Hermione from Dolohov in the Department of Mysteries was less effective than it would have been had he been able to say the incantation aloud. And while this is more anecdotal than statistical, Voldemort sought to be the most powerful wizard in the world, and he was practically screaming Avada Kedavra. So you may ask, why Latin? Well, first, we're going to need to look back at one of the earliest documented European cultures to use magic, the Druids. We know quite a bit about the Druids from the writings of Julius Caesar. A Druid was a member of the high-ranking class in ancient Celtic cultures. They were religious leaders as well as adjudicators, lore keepers, medical professionals, political advisors, legal authorities, and I think wizards and witches too. It was written that the Druids studied the stars and their movements, the size of the cosmos and the earth, the nature of the world, and the powers of immortal deities, signifying to the Roman people that Druids were also versed in astrology, cosmology, and theology. An ancient Greek historian, Diodorus Siculus, wrote, "These men predict the future by observing the flight and calls of birds and by the sacrifice of holy animals. All orders of society are in their power, and in very important matters, they prepare a human victim by..." You know what? I'm not going to get into that. But let's just say the early version of divination class is much crazier than what Trelawney is teaching. Caesar also wrote that Druids would journey to Britain to learn educational practices, which to me seems like evidence that the Druids could have been learning magic from a school 1,000 years before Hogwarts, which makes sense, right? The founders of Hogwarts were the most accomplished witches and wizards of their time, so they had to learn their magic from someone. From Pottermore, we learn that smaller and less well-regulated institutions have come and gone and are difficult to keep track of and are rarely registered with the appropriate ministry. But Hogwarts predates the Ministry of Magic, so of course education would predate any form of formalized government. Maybe the Hogwarts founders were Druids, or at least learned magic from one of their ancient schools of magic. In fact, some of the Druid places of worship could have doubled as a school of magic. Their temples, like magical schools of today, were located in quiet, secluded areas like clearings in woods and forests and stone circles. Probably the most famous stone circle in Britain is Stonehenge, which dates back to about 2400 BC. Could we have finally discovered the mystery of Stonehenge? Well, with all that being said, how did the Druids use magic? Though they were all learned in natural and supernaturalistic studies, only the most distinguished were said to carry decorated wooden staffs and wands. Heck, some of them probably bought their wand from Ollivander. His shop was originally built in 382 BC, and the family of Ollivander has long been associated with the mysterious profession of wandcraft. It is said that the name Ollivander means "he who owns the olive wand," which suggests that the original Ollivander arrived in Britain from a Mediterranean country, as olive trees are not native to the UK. Mr. Ollivander himself believes that his earliest forebears in the country arrived with the Romans and set up shop to sell ancient British wizards' wands. Now, you may be asking, how does this relate into Latin? Well, we're almost there. I'm trying to make this more interesting than one of Professor Binns' class, but I'll forgive anyone who falls asleep for this part. If there was a culture of witches and wizards, how could a Roman Muggle army conquer them? Despite all the ritualistic studying, potion brewing, and wand waving, the Druid magic must not have been very strong, because otherwise they would have beaten Caesar's army. The Druids would have used their wands, but to no avail. In 60 AD, less than 2 decades after the Roman conquest of Celtic Britain, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus marched on the sacred Welsh island Anglesey with an army around 20,000 legionnaires. He sought to exterminate this refuge for fugitives, which also happened to be the greatest stronghold of Druidism in Britain. As the Roman army arrived on the shores of Anglesey, they were met by a mass of Druids, arms outstretched, roaring such, quote, dreadful imprecations, close quote, into the heavens above. The Romans were said to be paralyzed with fear, but it was only momentarily. On Paulinus's command, the legionnaires rushed forward and absolutely annihilated the Druids. My guess is that these dreadful imprecations were their spells. However, these spells, though momentarily effective, couldn't overcome the Roman armies. Following the invasion, the Druid orders were suppressed by the Roman government. Rome's first emperor, Augustus, had decreed that no one could be both a Druid and a Roman citizen, and this was followed by a law passed by Emperor Claudius, which thoroughly suppressed the Druids by banning their religious practices. By the 2nd century, Druids had completely disappeared from written record. I believe that the Druids were forced into hiding by their violent Muggle subjugators, and in isolation, they discovered the strength of Latin incantations. At first, they may have adopted Latin incantations due to Latin being the general language spoken at the time, but as time went on, they would have discovered that Latin resulted in stronger spells. So why Latin? Well, Latin isn't just the basis of many spells. It's the basis for the scientific language, the Romance languages, and it's even present in the legal system. Perhaps Latin itself is just naturally charged and draws people to its simplicity. No one really knows why, we just know that it must be true. And I think this holds across all cultures and languages. From what we know, Harry and his classmates weren't fluent in Latin, and yet the spells taught at Hogwarts have their basis in Latin. And even across the pond, Tina uses Accio to summon Grindelwald's wand in Fantastic Beasts, so the language holds the same. Aristotle wrote about wizards in the 4th century BC. He said, "Among the Persians there existed the Magi, and among the Babylonians or Assyrians, the Chaldee, among the Indians, the Gymnosophistae, and among the Celts and Gauls, men who were called Druids." Though many miles may separate two groups of people, or even thousands of years, we still find witches and wizards among the various cultures of our world. Though one group of people may prefer a wand, while another may not, magic does not only belong to one group. This tells me that magic is inherent in this world, and while different groups may learn and improve their magic through various means, there's another type of magic at play. Part 2 is coming soon. Please subscribe so you won't miss out on the epic conclusion to Hogwarts Legacy, A History of Magic.